and talk first about handcuffs. And top 2 pickups of the week are going to be guys that if you'd listened to our handcuffs earlier in the offseason, you wouldn't have to be in bidding wars. We'll get to names towards the end of the show. We're not going to count them there. We're going to talk about the handcuffs that have not yet bloomed that you could still potentially get out there for relatively cheap, potentially even free this week. And if something happens to the starter, then you could have yourself a potential top 10 running back. Now, we always are looking at both the player that could be jumping into there, either talented, would they be a lead horse, but then also the environment they're jumping into. Is it an offense worth investing in? Is there a points per game? What are they looking at? Is it a run-happy scheme? Is it a team with a good line? These are all factors you got to consider with your handcuffs. I'm going to give you 5 guys real quick, though, that I think could be in prime spots should the starter ahead of them go down. And again, these are not guys that have the starter already down. We're going to talk about those 2. You probably know who I'm alluding to, the top 2 pickups of this week. But let's talk about some guys you maybe can get ahead on. My number 5 handcuff right now is Jeff Wilson, 16% rostered. We have Salvin Ahmed now on the IR, so Jeff Wilson is the clear number 3. The number 3 running back, Wolf, the handcuff, he's 2 steps away. Well, this backfield clearly has been supporting 2 running backs, and I'm more looking so at Raheem Mostert. He's missed at least 1 game in every single professional season. And yeah, last year he played 16 to 17. That was the most he's ever hit, and he's never topped in his career, though. 181 carries. The 2 seasons before played just 1 game and 8 games. And he's currently right now at 162 rushes. That's 10th in the league. This is Raheem Mostert, almost 32 years old. He's the running back 2 in fantasy. And I am not, of course, all these things, the prefaces, I'm not wishing for injury, but you got to look at the track record here. You got to look at the age and the carries that are building up for a guy that has never sustained this type of workload. Jeff Wilson could definitely inherit that big back role should something happen to Mostert. In fact, he was the preferred guy last year in that role when he first got traded to Miami. 16.2, 22.3, and 12.2 points in his first 3 games as a Miami Dolphin. Jeff Wilson was the running back 6, 7, and then 25. And those 12 points were all in a half. And then he got hurt himself. He finished the season with 11 or more points in 3 of his last 4 games as well last year. And of course, this season, though, Raheem Mostert's balling. And now we also have Devon Achane here, who, as we talked about all Sunday, if you were at our sit-start show, in his full 4 games now, has been a top 5 running back in all 4 of them. If he makes it through a game, Devon Achane is going to be a top 5 guy, averaging 150 yards from scrimmage, over 30 fantasy points per game. So that's obviously a different wrinkle here, that if Raheem Mostert goes down, we also have another back to contend with. It wouldn't just be the Jeff Wilson show, but this has been about a 50 split, and both backs are being sustained. Even Mostert last week, with taking the reins again, still put up 12 fantasy points. I do think Jeff Wilson could become a reliable source of 12 to 15 points should he be the guy. This is the number 2 rushing offense behind only the Ravens, number 1 in rushing touchdowns as well. Raheem Mostert himself, 16 touchdowns, more than the entire Jets team as a whole, and just as much tied with the Patriots offense as a whole as well. So I do think Jeff Wilson could be in a really, really prime spot. They get the Jets the first week of the playoffs. That would be a great matchup. And then Dallas and Baltimore, not great spots for running backs, but ultimately this offense is such a machine that I don't think it would really matter. So Jeff Wilson, my number 5 handcuff. Number 4 on that list, though, is DeAndre Johnson, 18% rostered. He has clearly taken over the number 2 running back role here since the bye. Bigsby snaps, Tank Bigsby, 17%, 14%, and just 3%. And more importantly, Etienne has gone down himself. He saw 80% or more snaps in every single game from weeks 4 to 8. He hit 23 or more fantasy points in 4 of those 5 games. But then post-bye, it's all been downhill. If you're a Travis Etienne owner, you know this. He's been the running back 36, 21, and 19 on 6, 9, and 13 fantasy points. But more importantly, just 63%, 65%, and 59% of the snaps for Travis Etienne. So already the role is just going down. We don't even need an injury necessarily for DeAndre Johnson to start seeing some value. In fact, he is coming off season high 43% of the snaps last week. He's seen 20% or more of the rush attempts in 3 straight weeks as well. And we got Etienne now dealing with a chest injury. It has him questionable day-to-day this week as well. It's been a while since we've seen DeAndre Johnson see meaningful work, but 2 seasons ago, when Chubb this time and Kareem Hunt, and we had DeAndre Johnson he had 3 games that year of 60% or more snaps, having 24 touches, 2 receptions, 168 yards, a touchdown, 24.8 fantasy points to running back 4. Week 10, 25 touches, 7 catches, 157 yards from scrimmage, 22.7 PPR points to running back 6. And then in week 18, 26 touches, 1 catch, 133 yards from scrimmage, and a touchdown, 20.3 fantasy points, the running back 9. Yes, a top 10 running back in all 3 games that he saw 60% or more of the snaps. He saw over 24 touches in every single one of those games. So the guy is DeAndre Johnson, a proven workhorse. When he can get that volume, he can get it done. So that is another guy to look at for your handcuff situations. My number 3 handcuff, Wolfpack, is Eli Mitchell, 17% rostered here, and we know the value. It's the San Fran offense that is 3rd in scoring right now with 30.1 points per game, 30 run plays per game, as well as 6th in the league. We know how brilliant this zone scheme is, and we know how good of a fit Eli Mitchell is. Now, CMC, we get it. He has 17 games last year, the first time he's played a full season in 2 years now. And now he's lasted all 12 games this year. He left early in that Dallas game, but ultimately played the next week, played every single snap the next week. He's been an absolute warrior so far. He's 2nd in carries, 2nd in targets among running backs. It's a massive workload. He's holding up brilliantly. He probably will hold up. At this point, 91% of his games, CMC has been a running back 1 in all but 1. His lowest output of the season is 14.2. He's been an animal. There's no doubt about it that this is the CMC show, unless an injury strikes. And just for 2 seasons before this, it was back-to-back. He missed over half the season. And so there is the risk that something happens here down the stretch run. And we've seen Eli Mitchell as a rookie. He was 8th in rushing yards despite only playing 11 games. He was a beautiful fit for this zone scheme, was the running back 12 in fantasy points per game that season in half PPR. He had top 24 performances in 63% of those games. 45% of his games were top 12 in half PPR leagues. So we know Eli Mitchell can be a beautiful fit for this zone running scheme. In the playoffs, he gets Arizona in the week 2. That right there in week 15, maybe he could come into value just standalone. Doesn't even necessarily need an injury, but obviously if CMC missed that week 15 matchup, we'd be ranking Eli as a top 7 running back for that game. Baltimore in week 16, not so great, but then Washington in week 12, a top 12 matchup for running backs as well. So a great playoff schedule for Eli Mitchell. If anything does strike for CMC, we've seen this guy get it done time and time again. My number 3 handcuff on that list. Number 2 on my handcuff list is Kenny Gainwell, 27% rostered. In fact, we're already seeing the injury nibble here at DeAndre Swift, who exited Sunday's contest against these 49ers late in the 4th quarter. Now, they were getting blown out. It's not a guarantee that Swift's going to miss any time here, but starting to see it's the first time we've seen Swift make it this far in a season in his entire career. We know that there's an injury track record there with DeAndre Swift, and we also know there's a track record with Kenny Gainwell really performing well in this offense when given the keys to it. Even this last week, in fact, 2 carries, 5 yards, not great, but the 5 catches, 42 additional yards. We've seen him, Kenny Gainwell, perform really, really well, especially as a pass catcher in here. As a rookie, he had games of 17.8, 17.2, 16.7. About a third of his games went for top 12 running back numbers, and he hasn't really gotten the usage similar to that. But this is the number 4 offense in the league, 27.4 points per game, and they have the best playoff schedule among all running backs. Seattle in week 15, the 4th most points to back, the most points across their last 5 games, getting absolutely destroyed by running backs. Oh, the Giants, the 8th best matchup in week 16, and then Arizona, the 2nd best matchup for running backs in your championship week. So if this injury lingers for DeAndre Swift that he suffered, this ankle injury, if it worsens and that we have Kenny Gainwell making a start, this is one of the best lines in football as well. The schedule is there. Kenny Gainwell could be an absolute animal in your stretch run. So he's my number 2 handcuff in fantasy football. Really, really close, potentially right in line with my number 1 guy. That is Rico Dowdle, though, for the Cowboys. Also the most available of all these handcuffs. Why? Well, 1, the Cowboys offense is just an absolute machine right now. The number 1 scoring offense in the league, 32.3 points per game. But in their last 3 games, 39.7 points. They are absolutely cooking. Average 29 run plays per game. That's 9th in the league. This is a top 3 offensive line as well, particularly strong as run blocking. Tony Pollard himself, 5th in carries, 180, 9th in targets, 50 right there. There's tons of opportunity here if something does happen to Tony Pollard here. And even if it doesn't, we got Rico Dowdle besting Tony Pollard right now on nearly every efficiency metric. Yards per carry, yards per touch. Tony Pollard only scoring 0.74 fantasy points per opportunity, whereas Rico Dowdle, he's the running back 39, Pollard. Dowdle's the running back 17 in points per opportunity, the running back 13 in yards per created per touch. He just looks really good every time he touches the ball. A lot of people out there comparing, like, Dowdle's now the new Tony Pollard, and Tony Pollard's the new Zeke out there. So already, just efficiency-wise, eyeball test-wise, Rico Dowdle is really passing the test. And if he had to make starts, we just talked about how ripe this overall offensive opportunity is. The schedule is mediocre. Buffalo, 13th most points allowed to backs, but then you get Miami and Detroit. Not great matchups for running backs, but also shootout style feels. And I believe the Cowboys probably are one of those few teams that are actually matchup proof, consistently in the red zone, consistently churning out points. So that is a reason why I think Rico Dowdle, if he gets that opportunity, there's also no one else he's contending with too. It would be a 75 to 80% type of workload guy in the best offense in the league, making him my number one waiver wire handcuff out there in a ton of leagues. So that wraps up, Wolfpack, my top 5 handcuffs ahead of your fantasy playoffs. What is up, you fantasy wolf? Thanks so much for tuning in. If you haven't already, share your thoughts in the comments, check out some more videos, and join the newest Wolfpack by subscribing below.